Doug, thank you so much, and to everybody here at Murray Hill, just thank you so much for the warm welcome that we've received. It's always great to come here. We look forward each time we get to be here. We wish it could be more, but it's a long drive. But when it hits, minus 11 at home, we're glad it was this week. And I'm going to start by just begging for your forgiveness. I see lots of red, and I know that today is Valentine's Day. And so, a natural message would be, one on love. And maybe romantic love, maybe the meaning of marriage and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to look at a different word today. It's a different kind of relationship, but it just seemed really appropriate for this time that we're here with you. But having said that, if you were hoping to hear advice on romantic love, if you're in need of advice or counseling of a romantic nature, especially gentlemen, ideas of things to do, if you need a hugging lesson, I've been told that Pastor Doug will be out there afterwards doing private counsel sessions, and that you don't need to miss out. So even though I'm going to speak of something different today, you won't miss that. Especially the hugging lessons, gentlemen. He is a big fan of those, from what I've been told. But today I want to look at a different word. Our church in Hamilton is called the Hamilton Fellowships. And I want to look at a word today that comes from Philippians. It's the first chapter. We're going to look at a few verses, 3 to 6. And in particular, one word that comes in there, koinonia. And it's going to come up. It won't say that in yours, because that's the original word. But you're going to see it, if you take a chance in your Pew Bibles, 1178, it's going to be in there, and you're going to look for a word partnership. And that just seemed to me so appropriate as we get to be with you and visit with you and talk about this partnership that we have, that your church has with the Hamilton Fellowships, the support. So if we can look at this passage, see a great example that the Apostle Paul teaches us about. And if I can just encourage you in that, then my job is done. That's what I want to have done. And it goes a little bit like this, verses 3 to 6. I give thanks to my God upon every remembrance of you. So this is the Apostle Paul writing to a church. He's in prison, but he's writing to this church, this group of believers that they've had a relationship with. Interestingly, this might be one of the churches that he never actually visited himself, but has been supporting him. And so read this as a letter, as a man writing back, and he talks about, he gives thanks every time he thinks of them. And he goes on to say, I give thanks every time I remember you. Always, in every prayer for all of you. I do it with such great joy. Joy for the koinonia, the fellowship, the partnership you're reading in your Pew Bibles, the partnership that we have in the gospel from the first day until now. And so he's writing them, thanking them for this partnership that he has had with them, this fellowship, this communion that they've had from the first day until the present day that Paul is writing. And then he goes on to say this, having confidence in this. So Paul has confidence in this, that the one who began this good work in them will continue that on to the day of Christ Jesus. So he gives thanks, and he is confident that God, who started this good work in this faith community, is going to continue that on till the day of Jesus, right? When Jesus comes back, till the last times. And it's this idea of a partnership that really struck me. This koinonia, this fellowship. Some other translations might call it a communion. Partnership is neat because we call it a partnership that we have. But lest you think that that's just an on-paper business agreement, I think as we look at what Paul talks about this partnership being, that it's something much deeper than that. We can say that this is an intimate and personal relationship that he has with this group. And so even though it's Valentine's and I'm not giving you a message about marriage, could I just challenge us to say that this idea of partnership that Paul is talking about is a relationship, and it's meant to be an intimate and personal one. But more than just that, it's an intimate personal relationship with a purpose, their common purpose, which Paul states as in the gospel. And so I just wanted to look at this idea again, highlight maybe a little bit about what Paul is talking about in terms of his relationship with this church of the Philippians in Philippi. And maybe just to encourage you and to thank you and to say that each time we pray, we give thanks for all of you and all that you have done for the sake of the gospel in Hamilton. Well, the first thing that we'll see if you were to read through the rest of this letter is that this relationship really is a spiritual one. Right? We can see a number of things. We see Paul speaking about, even right off the top, giving thanks in all his prayers and petitions, that this is a spiritual relationship that is based on prayer. And we go for that, and then Paul will tell us that it's in the gospel, the reason for their relationship, the shared common purpose to see the gospel, which is the good news message of Jesus, go out from our faith communities into the world around us. And so they share this common purpose. It's a spiritual relationship. And then lastly, it's one on faith. Remember, again, that Paul is in prison. He's not with them. I'm sure he'd love to teach them things. And if he's anything like me, he wants to be in all places at once so he can be there. But the way that Paul functioned was that God would call him to different places and to start new works, or in this case, he would build a relationship with an existing church, and he wasn't physically present. This called on great faith for both Paul, who couldn't be with them in these next stages of their growth and development, but also for them who are partnering with Paul, who aren't there to see every day exactly what he's doing. Is he spending the money right? Is he doing whatever it is? It takes great faith, but this is because it's in a common purpose, and really the foundation of their relationship is one of faith, and it's a relationship first and foremost with God and what he's called them to do. And I just want to encourage you, as I look out and as I think about the names, as I think about what Murray Hill has invested in Hamilton for the sake of the gospel, I see all of these things. Right? Prayer. How many of you here have prayed for us? It's amazing. I come down and I throw out an email every once in a while or a newsletter, and I'm like, I don't know if anybody reads it or not. And sometimes it gets so busy, I forget what I wrote. And people are amazing at coming up to me and saying, hey, I read that thing you wrote and we were praying. Can I tell you how much that means? And when you ask questions about my kids and I know you're praying for them as they're on mission, it means a great deal. And when we hear stories about people, my favorite one still from early on is Edith, right, who bought a new computer. Have I got that right? Because hers didn't have graphics that were good enough to prayer walk my neighborhood. So if she got a Mac, she could see it better and pray better. If that's not a commitment to pray, I don't know what is. And those stories are just incredibly encouraging for us. And let me encourage you. We covet your prayers, and we're seeing God do amazing things through your prayers. And I love this. There's no doubt that our relationship is based on that similar common purpose to what Paul spoke about, which is a partnership in the gospel. To see the good news of Jesus reach other parts of the world, and that we partner together to do that. Well, if it weren't for your prayers and your relationship and we weren't there, I couldn't be able to tell you stories like I do of my friend Pierre, who's the most recent guy that we've had in our church to give his life to Jesus, and it happened just a few weeks ago. And if you have one of those prayers, you may have read the story, but if you haven't, talk to me. We'll get you on our prayer list. But I'll tell you the story in short. A young guy who was born in Paris to Muslim parents, whose dad dies at 10 and moves back to Egypt to be with family and community, and grows up with this desire to please God. But in a faith system where the harder you try, the deeper you dig, and he began to study Islam and meet and study it in depth. But it left him feeling empty, because the more he knew and the more he knew he was supposed to be doing to earn his way to God, the more and more hollow and broken he felt, because he knew he couldn't do it all. And he couldn't be a good enough person to get into God's presence. And so we had a girl living with us from Vietnam, and she spent a time, and that was a great story in and of itself. She's moving out because she wants to try living on her own for the first time, and she posts all her food that she's learned how to cook, and it's really great. But she throws out a thing, hey, there's a room empty, and Pierre says, you know what, that's great. I'm looking for a room. I want to practice my English. Because here he is, he's in Egypt, but he starts asking so many questions that there starts to become tension between him and the community. And although there was no, threats on his life, there was veiled threats. Like, people who ask the questions that you're asking really should be executed. And so eventually he decides that it's the thing for him and his family that he may need to leave. So all by himself, he leaves Egypt. And as he leaves Egypt, he leaves Islam behind. And he arrives in Canada, and all around him, he just sees people living without any religion or any God, no interest in it at all. So he tries that for a season, but it just doesn't satisfy that hole that he has in his heart. And so here he is, he ends up in our house because someone's moving out and he wanted a place to stay, and there was a family to practice English with. So lo and behold, he ends up in our house, and he sees a Bible, and after 10 minutes of being in our house, he starts asking TJ, and she's doing her best to answer questions about the Bible. And so finally I said, hey, do you have a Bible? And he goes, yes, actually I bought one. And he tells me his story, and he said, I thought while I'm here in a safe country, I should explore other faiths, and I bought this Bible, and I didn't understand it. So I went to the library, and they gave me Bible for Dummies. And I've gone through that. And it's not too bad a book. But if you're trying to think in a devotional sense, it's maybe not the place to start. And so he's asking all these questions, and I'm talking to him and answering him. And I finally said, Pierre, I'm a pastor, right? Like, that's what I do. It's my day job. And he looks at me and goes, no, you have a church? I said, yes, it actually meets here. No, really? And we started connecting the dots about all this that God has done to move him from Paris to Egypt into our house and answer his questions. And it wasn't rocket science. I'm not great at evangelism. I just answer questions. And I use old things like, Pierre, let me give you a basis to get you started on your reading. And by the way, start in the New Testament, and we'll get to the other stuff after. But I said, God created the world. This is the message of the Bible, the overarching thing as you're reading. Keep this in mind, that God created the world and it was perfect, and that people turned and rebelled against God, and at that point, sin enters the world, and it becomes a broken place. And we see evidence of that brokenness all around us, right? There's broken relationships between people. There's broken, creation itself shows evidence of being broken, and our relationship with creation is certainly broken. And I said the deepest one, of course, is a break with a relationship with God. But the rest of the story you're going to read is the story of God redeeming his creation. And when we get to the end and Jesus returns and there's a new heaven and a new earth, and it's perfect, kind of like what we see at the beginning, but this return to a perfect place. And then I just said, so here it is, man, sin, big gap, God. And the cross is the bridge that gets us. Okay, have you ever heard that one? Maybe you've heard it, and you're like, yeah, or maybe you've heard it and go, that's so old school. We don't use that anymore. Well, I used it because it's the only thing I could think of in the time. And he just looks at me and he goes, that is what I've been waiting for. And now, anytime there's a word of the grace of Jesus, he weeps. And the sensitive me, I'm like, do we have, okay, oh, wait a minute. Go ahead. I'm so awkward in those moments. But he's broken. And he knows what it is when Jesus says, all you who are weary and burdened, he knows what it is to live under a system that piles burdens so heavy you cannot stand up. And he weeps. And this is the partnership that we're in. You have a significant role in Pierre's story. So let me encourage you and thank you for that. And of course, the last one is faith. Paul looks at the Philippians, he says, and I'm confident of this, that he who began this good work in you is going to see it through to completion. I know that when you come up in a trip or you send a check every month, we better trust. I hope Jason does something good with it. Don't pray that. Pray that God does something good with it. And he is. And we see stories like Pierre. So when you come up, you send a check, or you come up for a week and you meet people and you leave, and it's a relationship of faith Faith that God is doing something, and he is. God is doing something amazing in Hamilton. My furnace has broken down the last 2 Sundays that I've had to get up in front of people. So I know God is doing something, because that's what Satan does. Every time there's something good, he throws really weird stuff at us. So we haven't blown a car tire yet, but our furnace went on the fritz. So my dad is going, I've got it. You just go preach. I'm going to fix it. So every time that happens, something weird happens. So I can tell you, God is up to something. And you have a major role in that. So on the one hand, it's a spiritual relationship. And I referenced your trips coming up. You know, as we read through the letter of Philippians, we see too that the relationship that Paul had with the Philippians is one of people as well. Paul references a guy named Epaphroditus. And at the end he says, Epaphroditus is waiting to get back to you. He's really excited because he was sick, almost to the point of dying. And Epaphroditus, he knows that you know he was sick, and he's worried for, this is a pretty amazing guy, right? He's worried for you because he wants to get there and show you that he's okay. So they have sent Epaphroditus. And then Timothy is a young man, of course, that worked with Paul. And Paul says, he's one of my best. I'm excited to send him to you. I know you guys send multiple teams every year. And again, it's for a short period, and you see some neat things. But let me show you a few things that have filled in some of those little gaps that maybe you guys have when you only come up once a year. There's a number of you that served at the staircase. Anybody here serve at the staircase? Do you remember? Yeah. And we did really weird things like plant their flowers. Why are we going to a theater in our community to plant flowers? Really? And cut their lawn? They couldn't do it themselves? Well, no, actually, because there's one lady who runs this whole place, from everything from cooking the cookies to booking it, and she is a partner, and he helps out when he can. So we said, why don't we go and bless them and just do something nice and do their gardening? Well, we took a couple of times with our church over the summer to follow up on that. And just before we left to come down here, this is a theater that we started renting to do what we call our family reunions. See, we have a number of little small groups that meet in the city, and then once a quarter we bring everybody together and we do more of a service like you would have here with full music and a full band and all that. And this is the place that we go. And she will get up early to come to the staircase. Her name is Colette, an amazing person, and bake cookies for us. So that when we have this and our groups arrive, the whole cafe smells like baked cookies. Isn't it pretty amazing? She's never been to church. She's never been to our church. Hasn't come yet. But she'll still get up early enough. And that means all of our church members get to interact and learn about the arts from her. And hopefully she gets to see. She's always amazed. I've been standing in the cafe at times, and I'll hear her talking to somebody, and she's talking about this crazy church who has these people who come all the way from Florida to scrub our bathrooms and plant our flowers. And just before we left, they asked us if we would come and do some painting, and she asked if they could host an art show for me. So my work has been hanging there for the last week in the cafe, and they threw open the cafe, and they came and they worked it. They opened it for us, and they said, no, we want to hang your art, and you come, we'll throw a party. And so we did. We invited some of our friends that we meet there who do music, and so we had a night of music and art, and it was amazing for me to stand on that stage and get to play with some of those guys that I've met at the open mic, to look out and to see some of the people from our denomination looking really uncomfortable, hanging out in, I mean, it's a cafe, it's not a bar, but it's still a bar, and they're in the back going, just being supportive and feeling really awkward, and there's all these people from our church. And then there's some of my neighbors, and then there's people who just came from the community because this is a happening place and they just wanted to come to the art show that was happening there. And I see them all interacting and rubbing shoulders, and I'm like, that is pretty cool. How many people are meeting people from our church simply because we planted some flowers and they trusted in us enough to open the doors and invite us in to throw a party? And then if the coolest story still has to be, because you guys know this one and you've heard it, we talked about this being a relationship of faith, that you come up, you know, but for the rest of the year you're not there wondering what's happening. Isn't it the coolest that you would come up and throw a Thanksgiving dinner and we'd meet a girl named Anna from South Korea? And then a few months later, you'd send another team that happened to have some of the same people on it in the spring. And that's the day that we would be baptizing Anna. Because from that time in Thanksgiving, which was the first time we ever met her, to the time that you guys came back, that was in the fall, came back in the spring. I notice you don't come in the winter. Oh, that's a side thing. You came in through Thanksgiving, and by the time we were meeting in the spring, she had given her life to Jesus. She'd become part of our church family and wanted to be baptized. And we got to celebrate that together. That's God being pretty cool and being really generous to us, isn't it? I mean, we got to be there, but that you guys would be, that was so special for us. So here are some of the places that we've sent people, not in an official capacity, but this is some of the places because of your investment and partnership that we've seen people go. We've seen people go to Japan, to Venezuela, where they went with suitcases full of supplies because I don't know if you know anything about the country right now, but they can't get regular supplies just to live day in and day out. And we sent some of our people with backpacks full of aspirin and just common toiletries that the people can't get, and blessed their families, most of whom are not believers. And so we got to bless them in Venezuela, China, where we've met people who have never seen a Bible before, and Korea. We've sent people to the beer store, and we've sent people to the bike shop. And in each of those places, people who had not heard about Jesus are hearing about Jesus, in large part due to your support. Well, so as we look at this fellowship, this communion, this interpersonal relationship, we see one that it's foundationally a spiritual one, based on prayer, based on the gospel and the spread of the gospel, and one of faith. And we see that it's one of people. This is how it becomes personal for Paul and the Philippians, and I hope for us as well. And then the last one is this. It's a relationship of provision. And it's always awkward and weird to talk about money, but not on a day like this where I can just come before you and say thank you for your sacrifice. I know that anytime we give financially to something, it means sacrifice. It means saying no to something so that we can say yes to this. Paul mentions that the Philippians, he gives great thanks for them, that in times of his need, even times when it looked like no one else was there to support him, that they could bless him with a gift. It's a big part of the reason that Epaphroditus came to Paul is so that he could carry that gift from the Philippians. Epaphroditus delivered that, and so the Philippians would support Paul in his ministry. You have been faithful supporters and a great example to our church, and so I just want to say thank you for that sacrifice. And to let you know that we're doing our best to invest this for the sake of a gospel presence in Hamilton. I hope that you can see that there's some fruit and God is doing some neat things. But I just want to end with this thought. Because of your example, we've talked about the investment that you've poured in financially and with people, and your spiritual with prayer. But what you guys offer to our small church, with so many people who are young in the faith as well, especially over these last 2 years, is that you set an amazing example. So when people see people coming up from Florida, and going, they're coming here for a week? Really? That's just how they're going to spend their vacation? We say, you know, they're not just crazy, right? They're crazy in a good way, you know? They are passionate about Jesus, and they love you. And we can go to the staircase and say, hey, they just want to help us serve our community and to love our community, and that's why we're here. You are a great example. And so I just want to tell you that we're trying to carry on that example as we move forward. And that as we come here this year, 2016, we've had some pretty amazing things. We spent the fall kind of scrambling and getting ready for this. But in January 1st, 2016, the Hamilton Fellowships officially became its own standalone church. Recognized, so that means we're incorporated. Yeah. It's pretty exciting for us. Really, there's just a lot of paperwork. It means the government says, oh, you're incorporated, great, and you have a board. That's super duper. And now you can have charity status, and it came just in the nick of time, but for January 1st. But I'll tell you why it's important. because now that we're an official charity, means we can write tax receipts, which is great, as our people give. But based on what they've seen people do and based on what God has done on people's hearts, we're seeing our people start to give sacrificially. And it means that we can do things like launch out and become a sending church ourselves. So back in January, we got to commission another church planter and send him out to the far other side of the city to start a new church. His name is Chandler and his wife Maria, great people, a really sharp guy, but most importantly, really faithful. I've really grown to love Chandler. He is plugged in with us for the period of over this year, and he's been learning, and he's been learning about church planting and how do you pastor in that capacity, how do we live missionally, how do we do it. And he has a wonderful relationship with a bike shop that meets in the other end of town, which means you have some of the affluent members of the community who choose to ride their bike all year round because they want to live, work, and play very big in our city within their community. But it also means through the doors of the bike shop, he has refugees that will come because they don't have another form of transportation. And so they'll have a refugee night where they'll teach them to fix the bikes, and then they'll send them home with that bike. My beer store guys have a place now that they can go, and Chandler, he'll come with me to the beer store sometimes, or we'll take them to the shop and have their bikes fixed up. So this amazing cross-section of people. And through that, they were just recognizing so many relationships and that rather than trying to just send them to a church and hope maybe that they'd find a place that they would belong, that they could start to build disciple relationships right there in the bike shop. And as they say it, teach people who are bike mechanics to become holistic people mechanics and to bring eternity into their view. And so they do monthly services there. I don't know if you've ever done probably not, a worship service in a bike shop. It's pretty cool. The first time I was there, the percussion was bike parts. And so they started with that, and they've been doing that for this year. And then in January, they just launched their first weekly small group. And so Chandler's doing one of his other leaders, so they have 2 new small groups. And so in January, we commissioned them and sent them off because he's got enough going on in his own that he can just step out from our ministry. And our goal, of course, is for Restoration Hamilton. They have a website, and you can go look at it, to grow into its own entity at someday and continue. And they've already started. They're taking what we do at the beer store on the West End, and they're starting that this summer in the East End. And they're starting 2 small groups, and they have a worship service and a weekly prayer night. So it was really encouraging for me to be able to walk our people through becoming incorporated first, and then becoming recognized as a charity status, and then just this past month to become a sending church ourselves. And we have included them in our budget. And so we are giving a part, and our goal is to mimic what you guys have done for us, to offer prayer and people and provision for this new church plant that started. So I read this passage of Paul, and I thought, can I just share this with you to encourage you that when I read Scripture, I see you guys living this out. And to just put some stories in behind that, and to say your investment and this relationship, this fellowship, this communion that we share is so significant to us. And we've seen God do amazing things through your investment of time, energy, and resources. So we want to come and say thank you and to bless you. And if it's all right, I'd just like to close and pray for you guys. And then I know Doug is going to come up and sort of offer some last few words and opportunities for response. But let me pray for you. And once again, to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you have invested into my family and the Hamilton Fellowships as we partner together for the sake of the gospel. Let's pray.